So I have a few updates.
Yeah, please tell me.
And before I go into the XRSH updates, I really loved your tweet about the I call it Lego bricks, but maybe later you should elaborate a bit better about it. But yeah, before we go into that, let me show you quickly what I discovered. I did two tiny prototyping sessions. Let me share my screen. One of them had to do with communication between tabs, and
Yeah.
let me do this. Hope you can see my screen. I have tried
Yeah.
various things. So I have two browser tabs open here. I don't know if you can see it.
I mean, they're not side by side, but yes.
Yeah, they're not side by side indeed. So well, basically, I reuse the code for the copy paste clipboard just to
Mhm.
send something to
Yeah.
the other uh, browser tab. So I'm copying some text to the clipboard, Control C, and now I'm pressing the paste button. And
Yeah.
because of the clipboard, you get this consent screen. I will allow it. And now you see that it pasted something text to the clipboard. If I go to the other tab, you also see that it copied it to here. And there are various complicated ways of doing this, but I found a really nice sort of escape hatch, which greatly simplifies this. It's basically where is it? Yeah, there is a an event called storage, which is
Mhm.
fired once you do a set item on that local storage, and this storage is
Yeah.
actually, yeah, it's triggered on every tab which is serving that page. So that was a surprisingly easy
Mhm.
way to basically share content. So concerning XR I think this could be an interesting way to well, this is more like local communication. It should be the same page, but perhaps it could allow you to open up multiple sessions, multiple tabs, and yeah, perhaps move certain 3D objects or certain text data or JSON or whatever into another session. So that was one. Well,
So,
yeah.
for the purpose of the video recording, and every time I think starting just a tiny bit back on, let's say, what's the value of XOR and tabs, or the relationship of okay, I understand the challenge. The value of going through this might not be obvious. So could you expand on that just a little bit, like why it matters? And also,
Mhm.
uh, a direct question: does it work on the Quest browser? Because I imagine, in terms of XR aspect, that's, well, sadly, the most popular, accessible, and up-to-date browser. So it became the de facto norm or standard.
Yeah, yeah. So taking a step back, like I think a week ago or some weeks ago, we discovered the fact that the browser can be sort of shown inside an immersive WebXR experience on the Meta
Mhm.
Quest 2 and 3, etc. And that I think we were experimenting a bit with copy paste, which seemed to work fine. And then I think it was you or somebody else who said something like, "Well, would be curious, what about communication between tabs?" And so that was a bit on my mind when I did this little
Mhm.
experiment. And while I was doing this, I was also thinking like, why am I doing this? Why could this be handy? First of all, the first reason I had is that I don't know. It's a bit of a
Fair enough.
sometimes you just have to try something to remember,
Yeah.
and then later suddenly you can make a new connection. So basically, first reason, there's no purpose. The second reason,
Uh-huh.
while I was doing this, I was thinking that, hey, so if I want if I want multiple terminals, then of course I can do it inside one immersive session. I can, but who knows? Maybe I want. Maybe there are people who just prefer, popping up the browser and creating another tab and starting a new session in there, because you don't really know how people prefer to use terminals. Do they want to use it multiple ones in one WebXR session, or do they just want to have a couple of browser tabs and maybe jump into immersive mode? Um, uh, yeah, depending on the tab. I don't really know, but I was thinking this is a great extra communication way. Besides just being able to copy paste, this could basically synchronize
Mhm.
state between these tabs. So that's a bit of a background. But again, maybe it's useless, but it's yeah, it's something I just wanted to share.
So briefly on the useless part, um, I don't know. I don't think it's useless. But even if it were to be useless, it's. I was discussing with a friend yesterday over lunch, and he's finishing his PhD on graph theory or in mathematics,
Uh-huh.
and he mentioned recursional mathematics, and I also mentioned like number theory, how integral numbers relate to each other, like integers,
Uh-huh.
and it sounds totally pointless. Like why even do this? So there is the recursional aspect, but for example, if you take internet payment or your credit card, it's based on the cryptography, and cryptography is mostly based on number theory and computational complexity or complexity. So things that are so abstract that initially people were like, it's pointless, like it's mathematically interesting, but it's never going to have an application, is at the basis of how we communicate to each other right now, how we pay to buy food today. So it's what seems useless or pointless has absolutely no say on how impactful it might be in the future. So I'm absolutely not criticizing the
Yeah.
point. What I wanted to highlight though is that the current statu quo of the browser, again the Quest browser, but I mean if one rebuilds Volvic and fork it or modify it, you could have multiple tabs at once while being immersed. Is like while you're immersed right now, um, you don't have tabs basically.
Mhm.
Well, you since last month, and as you said, started this kind of explorations, is that you can now have an immersive experience running and have the browsers open, or the browser singular open, and that browser can have multiple windows and also so visible. But I don't think while being immersed, but at least they can be one singular browser window with multiple tabs open. So that's where it becomes potentially useful.
Mhm.
But it's not the traditional way that people have been doing WebXR. First,
Yeah.
having a tab at all open while being in XR is new, and then having multiple tabs is also new. So it's the age of interaction in WebXR, I would argue. One quick technical question: the storage that you mentioned is shared on between tabs, but on the same page. Let's say I cannot have access to, um, like for example, Jitsi Meet. If they were changed to storage, uh, could I access this from the demo page that you used?
Well, I don't think so by default. I think it can only happen via post message, which is a JavaScript
Uh-huh.
function to communicate um, with other tabs. Or I don't know if I say that correctly, but I think you need to agree on some kind of messaging if you want to share or sort of access other people's storage.
Okay.
And so it's not that straightforward. So it's more like a same page event bus.
Right. But for example, if on my wiki I were to add a little JavaScript snippet, that could also be part of those pages that can communicate between each other, but it wouldn't be the case with, I don't know, Wikipedia or something like this, unless I were to add a browser plugin or something like this, which is not feasible right now.
Yeah, that's I guess so. And a great question would be, would sort of bookmarklets be interesting at some point? Because
They are not supported, are they?
they are not supported, but I read on the Wolvik news page that they switched to Chrome and they basically said there will be extensions, there will be basically a full browser experience. So I'm really curious. On one hand, where that is going, this direction is very interesting, and on the other hand, what are reasons for Quest of not doing that? Because this Oculus browser is very minimal, and so yeah, hopefully, if there are some concerns on the Oculus side, hopefully Wolvik will maybe show new directions, because I do understand that frame rate must be high at all times, and you never know what kind of nightmare all kinds of extensions could cause. But I'm really curious. Maybe some extra extension permission flags or some more care into that area could be very fruitful, hopefully. Should I go on to the next update?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the next update is basically so I basically worked a bit on this the V86 virtual machine, which is a pretty fast. I say pretty fast, but right now I'm recording with OBS and my screen is a bit bigger than you can see. Anyways, so I was experimenting with that and trying to render it to a canvas via Xterm, which traditionally renders to a div document. And I don't know if the latest version is here. Wait, let me check. Maybe this is still a cache. Let me reload this one. What is this doing? So here you can see a sort of like in progress, in development moment. So this is basically, I just clicked this terminal icon here on the right, and it basically spawned both the immersive version as well as the 2D version of the Xterm canvas. So yeah, I'm working on this. Obviously, we want it to be we want it to be switchable. This sort of spatial mode versus 2D mode. But yeah, it's making progress, and I think soon I can basically shove in the V86 terminal, which basically loads an ISO with a real Linux distribution. And then we are getting closer to having some sort of terminal in WebXR, basically. So that's the update so far.
Nice. I think here it could be interesting to have Sorry, to have an optional backend. Let's say right now, this this would be the backend local, so straight from that page. But one thing that I found also interesting is, for example, connecting to Docker image that share using EasyRTC or WebRTC, or I forgot the name, but there is another project like this that I used, where you have, it's not the proper ISO, but like from leaning, I think the Chirpix web VM, you still have basically a manipulable OS up to a certain point in the browser. So basically abstracting this away to say, okay, this is one backend among others, and yeah, that might be something interesting, so that it's, yeah, regardless of being this or another one, maybe even other architecture, or I don't know what, like most use cases would revolve around. But yeah.
I think that's pretty easy to do, because like this is an ISO terminal, but we could also add a proxy terminal, which basically connects to a WebSocket, and then yeah, we just need some one-liner in the documentation or in the guide to basically proxy the Docker IO TTIYO to this terminal. So yeah, that is definitely a really cool application. And to go full on nerd mode, that could even allow some kind of mega terminal grid of remote sessions, local Docker sessions, actually a local ISO in your browser. It's yeah, it could be very interesting.
Because to give an example also, and the same, to try to go back a little bit in terms of why do this in the first place. One of the reasons I've done that in the first place is programming in Python in WebXR, and it's normally not possible. You're basically stuck to JavaScript. But if you start a Docker container and you expose it, and you can send Python code to it, and it sends back the result, you basically being able to program in any language you want, as long as you have like a Docker image that you can send that code to, eventually with the data also, and get the result back. So in terms of being able to execute code in order to manipulate data straight from a WebXR session, it's quite valuable.
Yeah, and that would also be very conform the feedback loops, which has been described in cybernetics as well, where we no longer basically look at WebXR through the lens of our OS, but we can also look to our OS or OSs through the lens of a WebXR immersive sessions, which I think makes everything full circle. And yeah, it also reminds me a bit of this this Quest browser suddenly popping up in the immersive session. It's a similar interesting feedback loop, so almost a recursive, which I think is not just a single tiny feature, but it unlocks a huge amount of features you cannot even imagine yet, just because of this feedback loop, which is suddenly possible.
Indeed. And one little, though, I don't want to say criticism, but one thing I've been guilty of, at least, is that once that's technically feasible, it doesn't automatically change our habits. And if we don't, let's say, leverage that new opportunity or affordance, like, oh, we can like use any OS we want, any programming language we want, and we still get stuck in our quote unquote old ways, then we don't really leverage it. So there is a distinction there, which I've been guilty of oh, wow, it's feasible, and then I move on without leveraging it, without using it properly. So it's a little asterisk that I want to add, that once we've done it once, it doesn't automatically change how we work, even though it could and even might. We still have to force ourselves to change our ways.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't want to digress too much, but I also realized this with cables or audio cables, that at some point we went from mono to stereo, which was basically just duplicating the cables, basically two cables instead of one. And if you look back now, like if you, for example, think of how your headphone cable works when you plug it into your phone, there's actually there's actually some smart mechanism which can detect whether there's also a microphone connected to that cable as well. And it's some kind of some simple trick with a resistor. I cannot really explain it, but basically a cable at some point one cable was being reused in multiple ways, which, if I now look at stereo cables, stereo cables is a very stupid thing suddenly. It uses way too much cables than is actually needed, but it's like almost impossible to change this. I can scream from a tower till I die that, hey, the stereo cables are not needed anymore. We can do more with less cables.
Right.
It's not going to change how the whole, the stereo cables is sort of part of the minds of the people. I cannot change that with this new sort of feedback loop which I discovered. Yeah, that's a good point. So I think these are my updates for XRSH today. I think maybe it's time that you enlighten me with this very cool demo. I'm
Okay,
quickly gonna launch it, or can you share your screen maybe?
Sure. So
Okay.
I'll try to share my screen.
I did not really get you mentioned something like logic or like grammar. Like,
Grammar.
what
Yeah,
is the
I'll
grammar in
explain.
that? Yeah.
Yes. So do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put this in full screen. So it started a bit from manipulating post-it notes. And the difference with pure text is that post-it notes have a shape, like a square, basically. And here what I did, so they don't snap next to each other. The yellow post-it note is not blue and is thus not the same type. Whereas the blue post-it notes, they're both codes, so they snap next to each other. Whereas the yellow one repel. So that's the idea. And then I brought it to 3D because post-its are very much flat. And also because I discovered for kids, actually, that's how I learned some of basic math as a kid. There were those little cubes, and when you put 10 cubes together, you get a bar. And when you put 10 bars together, you get a surface. And when you put 10 surfaces together, you get a cube. And the cube is like 1,000 units, 1,000 cubes. And it's something that is literally graspable, manipulable, which for a kid, manipulating 1,000 blocks is mind-blowing. Like, you don't do this. So going from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 in a way that's manipulable is powerful, empowering. And I thought, this is cool, and it's physical rather. I don't want to change that. But what I can do is, if I do it computationally, then I can add rules. And the first thing I did was to take a cube, and it snaps. So up, they're next to each other, they're aligned according to the position and rotation of that first cube. But if I add another cube, normally it's going to replace it, which is going to be right on top of, so it doesn't work. So what I did is they can stack. So now I have 3 cubes, 4 cubes, and they are not overlapping. And the motivation behind this is basically to reproduce what I showed before, that once you have 10 cubes, you get a line. And then you manipulate not the 10 cubes one by one, but that whole line. What I mean by grammar, and I'll show a bit of code behind it, is that here I'm relatively happy with this. Basically, I have an unreleased attribute, so for the component, and then whenever you release the cube or whatever entity that you were managing or manipulating, it does execute that function. So if I go on the HTML part, here I have my little cubes with corners, but it's basically a cube or a box. And I have the unreleased property with snap map, so it snaps and it does the multi-arithmetic based logic, let's say, or grammar. And the grammar here is like 20 lines, so it's pretty simple, short at least, which is I find the closest elements, or I find the latest thing that's been moved, which is the cube that we just dropped. I get the closest cubes around, and if there is at least one cube nearby, so like 0.1 centimeter or less, it's arbitrary, but in that scale that works. Then I make them next to each other, and then I translate it, so I make it its size away. So here 10 centimeters roughly. But the quote-unquote magic part or the grammar part is here, if I have, or actually here it's to prevent overlapping. So I look until there is a cube at roughly the same position, I shift it further away, and I loop until it's not overlapping another cube. Now the grammar itself is this tiny function, which is just an example. When I have 3 cubes next to each other, then the cubes become arranged. It's not something actually in the video, but the idea is that you can have multiple type of entities, like post-it notes, that have a grammar in the sense of the behavior is relative to other entities of the same type. So the cubes here relate to each other when there is a certain thing. Let's say here the number of cubes, something happened. And it's within this type of entities, like post-it notes versus post-it notes. And its grammar in terms of it creates those rules, change the physics, let's say, even though here it's not physical in the sense of you drop it and it falls to the floor. It's physics in the sense that they have rules of existence. And here one of those would be you cannot overlap. You cannot be on top of another cube. And I think when you can manipulate not just the content, but that's what I meant here, the grammar themselves. So this I haven't done, but that's what I want is this 20 lines of logic should not be just text. They should have a shape. They should be manipulable themselves, not just the cube. It's say, okay, when I drop the cube, they don't overlap. That's a grammar. That's how they relate to each other and behave or not. This very grammar should be manipulable, should be changed. And I think I insisted a little bit on the grammar part because it's not about post-it notes, it's not about cube, it's about any domain. Like if you take chemistry, is a grammar in the sense that you took 2 carbon atoms together, they're not going to bind the same way as if you took 2 helium atoms together. And if you put the 3 of them together, they're going to arrange themselves a specific way. So chemistry, I think, is quite obvious because in high school, most of us played with spheres or marbles that represented those entities. But I'm rather convinced, but it's just my personal, let's say, philosophy at the moment, that any domain of knowledge is basically a grammar, that you learn the rules of those entities within the domain of knowledge. So if you can bring a domain of knowledge to an explicit set of rules, a grammar, and you can make that grammar manipulable, graspable, I bet, but again, just a bet, that you can learn that domain, being chemistry, arithmetic, whatever, a lot more efficiently, because you don't manipulate something abstractly. You have those rules, you have this grammar, you have those relationships, you see them, and then you manipulate them. I think it makes it more. You're showing something that was hidden so far. So that's the hope behind all those experiments.
I really like this kind of thinking, because this is the big problem with a lot of the apps and I guess websites, is that it's very hidden. All the logic which is happening, all the algorithms. Let's say a simple Jira is basically post-it notes with an incredible amount of invisible logic behind it, and this is a really cool starting point to basically model a certain domain, but have it immediately visible, and how it responds to other elements. I really like this. I can also see how you started with post-it notes, and how you sort of you didn't fall into the trap of thinking like, hey, let's make a Kanban board out of this, because you can go actually way further by creating this grammar, this visual grammar. It's really cool, actually. I think perhaps this is also what, I don't know if Roblox or Minecraft is a certain grammar, but yeah, there is definitely some interesting, I guess, unexplored territory in there, especially in VR.
I'm pretty excited by exploring this, in VR and otherwise. It's kind of what I was saying to a friend yesterday at lunch, that I don't really care about VR. It's just the most exciting interface we can shape however we want today. So I think being able to do this and make it, I don't want to say tangible, but manipulable at least, is exciting. But I think it's exciting about manipulating knowledge and relationship that are until now hidden, making it explicit. So I think I want to say, I don't know, I think it has potential. At the very least, it's a fun exploration to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is more to it. I think honestly, it sounds like such a basic pedagogical principle, like things that are hidden, you show them. And there are a couple of examples like this. If you take a sentence like grammar in terms of linguistic, you highlight the different types and you color the different words based on such types. So, for example, the verb is going to be cyan, a noun is going to be green, and then you go from a sentence which you don't know what it is to words, and those words you separate them with spaces, and then you highlight the types with the colors, and then you go back to. So I think this kind of method of decomposing in entity or atoms and finding the grammar and making that grammar visible is something powerful. It's very much underused, in the same way that VR brings us to something to be able to shape the world in front of us. Even though it's virtual, it's still a world we can manipulate. I think the intersection of both, there is a lot to do. So that's the philosophy behind those explorations.
Really cool. Is there any book you can suggest on this topic of visual grammars?
Not that I know of. There is
a writer, author?
Yes. There's a French philosopher who was actually teaching in the engineering school I was at, and I'll put the link because I actually forgot his name. But if you look at grammaticalization in English, I think it also works. Some of it is really philosophical, so it might sound very abstract, and even pointless, I would argue. But I think, pedagogically speaking, in terms of making those abstract notions like an item and how they relate to each other with rules, is worthwhile. But I think really, I was a little bit, to be honest, I think exploring the philosophy of it and the books behind it is useful, But I think when it's really useful is when you make it, when you build it, when you apply basically this kind of ideas that I think have been existing forever. Just they didn't necessarily have a name or an affordance in order to grasp and manipulate them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to get sort of like lost or trapped into all kind of philosophical, non-practical stories.
Yes, and I think maybe here, if this author were to reread this, I need to search it because I forgot the
No worries.
Stigler, Bernard Stigler.
No,
I'll put also a link on the chat here for reference. Yeah, maybe he would even say, "Oh, it's not exactly, or it's not even at all the idea I had in mind." So that's the beauty of prototyping. Maybe that's not what the author meant, but as long as there is something interesting and usable after, then it's still valuable. So maybe it's what he had in mind, maybe not. But I think philosophically, it's aligned in terms of making the invisible, or I also like the director of the Stanford Virtual Human Lab, who is saying, don't use VR for the casual, use it for the literally extraordinary, like going to Mars or going inside a fire or an atom or in another planet or in the blood vessels, not to like sort out your desk or this kind of things. Keep it special. So I think here manipulating grammar is something special. So I think it should sounds like a good usage of it.